Okay, we are back with the Q&A for the final Intro to C session, the test sessions we've been doing. I think they went pretty well. Obviously, it's hard to cram everything you might want to know about C into just 5 days, 5 hours or something. I don't know, we got 6 hours of time. So I strongly suspect that, if I really, maybe at some point, based on the response to the Handmade Hero thing, which has been much, much more enthusiastic than any possible thing I was expecting. I wasn't expecting anyone to even notice this stream for months. Basically, since there is so much interest, at some point I probably should go through and do a real full intro to C that's like, 4 weeks long or something like that, so that people who literally have no idea how to program or how to program in C can come to it and actually learn absolutely everything, instead of kind of me quickly going through things and showing you, okay, here's examples of all the stuff that we're going to be doing, and now good luck. But hopefully it was good for some people, and I think maybe it was hopefully a little bit helpful for people who kind of know programming already, but maybe don't know all the C stuff with pointers and how they work and where stuff goes on the stack and executables and stuff. Because that's kind of stuff probably that you wouldn't necessarily know if you programmed in a different language that worked differently, or in environments that work differently, and so on and so forth. So anyway, thanks everyone for coming to the Q&A. At CMuratori would be the thing to put at CMuratori in the chat window if you want me to see it for the questions. And since this is a Sunday, I don't think I have to go until like 5:30 or something. So we can do Q&A for a long time today if we want to. We'll see how it goes. Spaker asks, have you ever found use for bitfields? The answer is I don't know that I've ever used bitfields myself much. Bitfields are basically a thing, for those of you who don't know, where you're basically allowed to define sort of structs almost, but where the structs have a specific number of bits allocated to each member that's less than a byte oftentimes. And I don't tend to use them only because I like to be more explicit in my code, and I don't know what the compiler is going to do when I do that. Bitfields, the compiler is going to generate some stuff, and I'd rather just hand code it usually. But I do things that you could do in bitfields. I just usually hand code them. So yes, I could easily use bitfields. I just don't tend to, but they're useful. So in watching expressions, typing x comma b when an int variable x is initialized will allow you to view the values in binary. Does it actually, or is that only if you're on the newer version? That's what we were trying to figure out earlier in the stream. So y comma b, yeah, it doesn't work. So I think they added that later. So hopefully in the mainstream we'll be able to do that, because I'm going to switch to 2013 Community Edition in the mainstream. But the problem is I was using the one that was on this computer that was the original one that was licensed for this computer, because I didn't know I needed to use I wanted to be able to use the register window and stuff. So I didn't want to use Express for some of the things we were doing. But now that I know that it's actually free to just use the newer one, I'll be using the newer one. And then x comma b should hopefully work, we hope. Idiocracy, regarding your diagram of virtual pages, disk and physical memory, does the virtual memory address space itself reside in physical memory? You said that the VMAS goes out to physical memory to get data, so is there a section of physical memory set aside for the VMAS and the rest of physical memory is made up of data retrieved from the disk? The diagram is a bit incestuous, confusing to me at the moment. Yes, that diagram is probably not the best diagram. So here's what I'll say. If I remember correctly, and I may very well not, so you should probably go look this up if you really care. In Windows, the page table, which basically tells it all the stuff, the thing you're asking about, the thing that understands the virtual memory address space for processes, I believe the page table is not itself virtual in earlier versions of Windows, even like Windows 7, I think. Possibly even in Windows 8, I don't know. So basically, the virtual memory map, the thing that says where all the pages should be and how they're allocating stuff, I believe that resides in physical memory in Windows typically. But I believe they are now moving towards a scheme, or have already moved towards a scheme, where that itself can be virtual. So it's like 2 levels deep. So you can page some of it out. And I don't know if they've done that or are doing that. I don't pay much attention to the Windows kernel advances of recent year. So the answer is I believe it's normally in physical memory on most versions of Windows that are running currently, but I think they were going to try to make that virtual. because you do run into places now with 64-bit addressing and computers having so much memory, you do run into situations now where you want more, you want to be able to not be limited by the page table. You don't want the page table to be this hard constraint that starts eating up a ton of physical memory because you can't move it out. So I don't know. So I think that's true, but I really don't know. You should ask a Windows kernel expert and they would be able to tell you. You could also ask a Linux kernel expert how they do theirs, because every operating system has to deal with this problem of that. So, Seymour Troy, what happened to the nice background? I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. If the stack lives in cache on the CPU, what happens if the stack outgrows the size of the cache? Okay, so the stack doesn't live in the cache on the CPU. The stack lives in memory just like anything else. The stack is in your virtual memory space. So when the stack grows, it's growing in regular memory. Now the CPU, since it happens to be executing code that's using the stack is almost always hot in the cache. So you usually are, at least the top of the stack is in the CPU's cache usually, but it's all backed by memory. It's not living in the cache. The stack is the data that's actually living in memory, in the virtual memory address space of your running code. Now, you may be thinking of the iCache, which I referenced, and the iCache is for code, not data. The iCache is actually just the instructions, the actual assembly language instructions that the CPU is going to execute that our code got compiled down to, not the data, the code. That gets also backed in memory. That's all in the virtual memory address space. It just gets pulled into the iCache when it's being executed, because it basically doesn't want to have to keep doing the work of like blowing it out into micro-ops and whatever else it needs to do. You mentioned in the pre-stream that your crazy casted point arithmetic demonstration last stream was undefined behavior. Why is this? So like I said, I usually go by what compilers do, not what the spec does, because I hate the spec. The spec is garbage, and it drives me insane because I feel like they do really bad things with the spec a lot, and oftentimes it gets worse instead of better. So I don't actually know that it's undefined behavior. Someone said that it was undefined behavior, and it probably is. And the reason for that is that oftentimes, technically, it's undefined to cast things to different sizes that aren't allocated in the same pool. Like, I don't think you're technically always allowed to cast something from, say, a struct to a short that was randomly in it or something if you don't use a short that was actually in the struct. I don't know. So I'm not sure. It may be that it is actually defined, but it could also be undefined. It doesn't matter because it always works. And that is really the majority of what I usually care about, is what actually works. And if compilers stopped supporting that, I would not use those compilers anymore. Like, that's totally unacceptable to me. There had better be a switch in the compiler that makes sure I can always get a pointer to memory and do whatever I want. And if you can't do that, that is the end of me using your language, period. Are there system calls or something that lets you tell the OS to load your code into physical memory instead of the lazy page faulting thing? I don't actually know if there's a way to tell Windows to do that in some kind of general sense. But what I can tell you is there are ways of you doing all kinds of shenanigans that do involve specifically telling Windows. So you could, if you want to, let me see here. So here, for example, is a function called virtual lock. And what virtual lock does is virtual lock takes a base address, so somewhere a memory pointer, and a size, which is some amount of memory. And what it will do is it will just full on lock that into physical memory so that it can't be swapped out anymore. Like, I believe, period. I don't know if there's conditions where if it was really in a panic, it could do it. But for the most part, it means don't swap this out. And so you can actually go, if you wanted to, start manually virtually locking pages down. If you're just like, do not ever swap this to disk, ever, you can do that. It's not usually a good idea to do that, but you could. So there's other things like that you can do if you're really trying to force the operating system to play by your rules. Is the C runtime library different from the standard C library? Well, there's the standard C++ library, and then there's the standard C library, and those are different. But yeah, the C runtime library and standard C library, I think, should be two terms for the same thing. They're just like, fopen and fwrite and stuff like that are standard C library things. Stuff that's C++ standard library, like the STL, that's in the C++ standard library, and those are different. There's a difference between the C standard library and the C++ standard library. But yeah, the standard library versus runtime library, I think, should be the same thing. Why do you prefer KNR style brackets? Oh, so yeah, like I was kind of saying, white space is always optional. So you can do things. You can write code like that if you want. If you want your blocks to look like that, you can write code that even looked, it's called squash brace. It's the weirdest thing. You can do this. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. It's a style called squash brace. I always thought it was funny, right? It's full bananas, right? And it looks like that. And basically, it's the weirdest style because technically the bracket that lines up isn't the one that closes the block. So like this goes with this, right? But it looks like it goes with this. It's full bananas. So yeah, you can indent your code however you want, and you can put the braces anywhere you want. I use them like this because I think that's how my father did it. I want to say, but I don't know. I'm sorry, I do not know why I do that. It's how I've always done it, and I'm just used to it, so that's how I do it. Are there different performance characteristics with the different bitwise operators? Yes, there actually are. So basically, the way that bit operations work is it's entirely dependent on how the processor chose to implement them. So there are architectures where bitwise operators are flat cost. So basically, if I do a shift by 4, then that always costs the same as a shift by 6 or a shift by 30, right? There are other architectures where the more you shift, the more it costs. And the reason for that is because shifting is actually, I guess, kind of annoying in the sense that where the way you have to structure the gates, so that it's actually kind of more expensive, I guess, to do shifts that are long instead of short. I want to say that that is a bit esoteric, though. I want to say that maybe, I don't know if the P4 had some of this stuff in it, but I don't think so. I want to say that for the most part, the processors that we will be dealing with, it's usually flat cost. So ORs, ANDs, shifts, I think usually are a predictable fixed amount of time, and there isn't like a huge performance difference between them. But either way, what I will say is most of the time, those are not the ops you're counting. Most code just doesn't care how much bit ops it does. Usually the things that are costing you time are either floating point ops, so a lot of math ops on floating point numbers, which we didn't cover in the stream, we'll be covering in the main stream. Floating point numbers ops you're usually worried about, and memory accesses is really the thing. Like memory, how much memory you're sucking in and how many floating ops you're doing on that memory tends to be a lot more what you're worried about. I don't remember caring about a bitwise op performance-wise in a long time. But, correct me if I'm wrong. Like I said, when I answer these questions as best I can, but, honestly, my strong suit in programming tends to be like architecture and sort of like code design sorts of stuff. And I do have a lot of expertise in like animation systems and stuff because I worked on those for a long time. But like optimization isn't my strong suit. So, if you ask me something like what's the best way to write a blah, I ain't gonna know. Like someone asked about cache oblivious data structures, I didn't even know what those were, right? Which is an example, like if you were a super optimizations guy, there's probably no way you wouldn't have known what those were, right? You just know that because you'd be familiar with it. But I'm still mostly the type of guy who does large code, lots of code, well architected is usually what I can say I can give good advice on. But when we're talking about like really hardcore optimization stuff, that's something that you're almost always going to want a second opinion on, because I'll show you how to get it good, but if you want it great, that's going to be somebody else. That's going to be someone who specializes in optimizing that thing. And there's always someone out there who specializes in optimizing that thing, and they know more than someone like me who spends time doing other things, because processors are always changing, and if you don't keep learning how to optimize for the changes, you're always a little bit behind. So I'm always going to be a little bit behind when it comes to things like that. Let's see here. How much bit fiddling do you do on real code? Tons. We'll be bit fiddling probably right out of the gate on Monday. I bet we'll see some bit fiddling. It's not a ton, but like it's often. Yeah. You usually do a little bit of it in everything, just a little bit, not a whole lot. Will you be writing your own allocator? Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. couldn't you get the pointer to your variable that you want to see in binary and look at it in the memory window? The memory window doesn't do binary either. I don't think. I mean, yes, you could do that if the thing would have. Oh, oops, lady went to my braces there. You could do that if it was possible to actually display binary in the memory window, but I don't think you can, right? I mean, yeah, it doesn't have binary. It's only got hexadecimal. So we'd be no better off. We'd just be seeing hexadecimal again, which, so, you know, it's too bad. But people seem to be suggesting relatively strenuously in the chat that Visual Studio 2013 will allow us to view it in binary. So hopefully that will be true. We'll find out tomorrow. Not sure if this is too big to ask, but can you show us how to open a blank window using the WinAPI? That is tomorrow. Yes, that is not too big to ask, but tomorrow, that is what we will be doing. Clemensbaum, what do you think of RAII for resource handling? So RAII, for people who don't know, I actually used to do a lot of C++ programming, which is the only reason I know what RAII is. Normally, if you asked me a C++, one of these fancy C++ isms, I would tell you, like, I don't know what that is, and I don't care what that is, but I do know what RAII is. That's resource acquisition is initialization. It's usually what that means. What that basically means is designing code such that a single logical unit, usually in C++ they're referring to a class, which is a glorified struct, basically. As soon as it has acquired any resource, memory, a file handle, a network socket, something that is a resource that has to be acquired and then released. RAII basically means that the class is considered initialized once that resource has been acquired, and it's not supposed to do anything additional until basically unless you make like a new class that does the next step. Without trying to go in and give a full example of what that is for everyone, and showing perhaps why it is kind of silly, I will simply say that the way that you want to design code in general is to understand the ways in which that code can fail in practice and design the code so that it properly handles those failure cases. What people often advocate in C++ is trying to write your code such that it handles, and I'm using that in quotes, all possible failures at all possible points. What that means is, if for some reason my code couldn't open the file handle that it was trying to open, I want it to automatically, through a series of exceptions and destructors and all these other sorts of things, unwind all the stuff that it had been doing up to that point in a way that makes it so that it is somehow conceptually cleaner. I never find code written in that way to ever actually work in practice very well. I find that it's actually very brittle to failure. And the reason that I find that it's very brittle to failure is because the things that people have done is they have translated, they have moved the job of thinking about the ways the code can actually fail into just a reflexive way of just sticking things in constructors and destructors and assuming that the unwinding of the stack will just do the right thing. But the answer is that usually when things fail in your program that you expect to fail, like a network socket can't be opened, or a network socket doesn't send the thing it needs to send, or a file can't be opened, usually what you really need is custom logic that recovers from that failure in a smart way, and that logic is often different depending on the circumstance. One file not being able to open is different from another file not being open. If I'm trying to open file A, maybe the thing that I want to do when it can't open is wait a few seconds and try again. But if file B can't be opened, then maybe what I wanted to do is just exit the damn program because nothing's going to be able to happen. And those are simple examples, but really, it's not that much more complicated than that when you really start programming a real program. Really, it's just about you need to think about the failures and you need to write code that handles the failures. So what I find a lot of C++ programmers who are gung-ho about RAII do that I don't approve of and would not recommend is they spend a ton of time typing in code that handles failures that will never happen. And then when their code actually does fail in the places where I would know that that's legitimately going to happen on a running system, it totally blows up. And yeah, they freed the memory and closed the file handles, but who cares? Like, You need the code to actually work. It doesn't matter if it cleans up after itself. It needs to actually work. And so if you can't even get the code to work, why are you bothering dealing with whether you close the file handle? That is not relevant. That is not part of actually the problem definition. That is a way of making sure that your code does not leave detritus around and leak handles, but it is not actually the primary problem statement of what's supposed to happen. So like most C++ design patterns, I find RAII to be a way that people excuse themselves from doing the hard work by doing busy work, which actually does not solve the problem that they needed to solve. Hope that answers that question. How much bit filling? Would you be writing your own allocator? Couldn't you get pointer? Blah, blah, blah. Idiocracy asked the question from before, and yes, we will do that, but let me just see if there's any other code questions coming down here first. I will push this one onto the stack, and I will not forget it. Do I think a 4-year CS degree is a bad idea, waste of money? I have no idea. I have never taken one. Are you going to use structs instead of classes? Yes, I never type the word class. How will I handle the need for polymorphism? Polymorphism is a silly idea. Sorry to say it like that, but polymorphism isn't interesting to me. It's just not interesting. It's interesting if you actually maybe by polymorphism actually mean full duck typing. But really, like mix-in is the thing that you want, and C++ handles it very poorly. Its polymorphism using multiple inheritance just doesn't work at all. So what we're actually going to do is things that are much more powerful than inheritance. We're basically going to implement full mix-in, which will allow us to do things that are just far more powerful than you can do with inheritance. Inheritance is useless. It's a dumb idea. I don't know why they put that in C++. It's completely useless. You can occasionally use it to do something very rudimentary that's basically function pointer kinds of dispatch. And even then it's stupid. It doesn't work properly. It's way less capable than a table of function pointers because you can't modify the function pointers since the vtable format is opaque. So yeah, inheritance in C++ is awful. I would never, ever, ever, ever use it in a program. That said, there are programmers who I respect, like John Blow, who do use it. They use it very sparingly, usually one level of inheritance at most. So I certainly wouldn't argue with someone who decided to use it because there are effective programmers who do use it, but I will note that they use it very limited. And even John, for example, is kind of designing his own language because he thinks inheritance doesn't work very well. So, I mean, I think even he would probably agree, you'd have to ask him, but I think he would probably agree that inheritance is pretty weak and lame, and the only time you would really ever use it is for this really simple thing that it can sort of do, and you were almost the whole time wishing you had something better. Will the game be C++ or C, and any reason you did your intro as a C in a CPP file? The game will be C in CPP because I want to use some CPP features. We will use some operator overloading, and we will use some, we may use some constructor-destructor pairs to do things like automatically count times in blocks or something like that. I don't know that we will, but there are some little features of C++ here and there that I may use. Function overloading is another one too. So I find that it's usually best to compile in CPP mode, even though I mostly write code that looks like C, because I find that it's nice to be able to have the features of C++ if I want them. And then since I've had enough experience, I know which ones to stay away from, so I just don't use the stuff that gets you into trouble. So it's kind of just the best of both worlds to compile your C code in CPP, because you can always just switch up. What are the differences between references and pointers? So there is no difference between a reference and a pointer. Basically, a reference is just a way of getting a free dereference in there. So a reference, for those of you who don't know, if you declare your code to have an ampersand in it ahead of time, this is called a reference. Well, I need to actually set it to something that's actually a variable. This basically gets you a pointer to y that you don't actually have to dereference. So instead of normally, if that was a regular pointer, I'd have to type yref equals 6 or something to talk about the value pointed to by yref to do a dereference. A reference type just means one that I don't have to do that. I can just do it directly. I tend to not use them because I think they finally added a way to do this in C++ in the recent spec. but for many, many years, you couldn't override them. So you couldn't set a reference like using something, you know, update this reference, please, to point to something new, right? You couldn't do that. And so the reason I didn't use them is because pointers, I like to be able to set my pointers to point to new things, and so references were kind of useless. But I think they added something to do that now, so if you really like references, I think in the latest spec, you can actually swap references. I don't know, don't quote me on that. I don't read the spec anymore, but. Well, let's see. You said you were using C++, but it'll be backwards compatible with C. I don't think I said that. Or at least I hope I didn't say that. It will not really be backwards compatible. Most things I will do you can compile in C99. If you wanted to compile this stuff in C99, pretty much all of Handmade Hero will probably compile in C99 with a few exceptions that would be probably easy for you to fix. So it will be somewhat backwards compatible with C99. But that's not a goal, so I don't guarantee that. Let's see. You might want to talk about short-circuiting. I might talk about that in the mainstream, but okay, I'll throw it in here. So what short-circuiting means is if I have a, I remember I was talking about like you could sort of make these if statements that have things like ors and ands in them. So, okay. Basically, if you have something that looks like this, where I've got two different things that are going to happen to evaluate my conditional, right? And you know what? I don't even need to do them here. So let's say we're not even talking about conditional. I'm just computing the value, 0 or 1. I just want to know, or 0, not 0. I just want to know if this is true or false. Well, what happens in C is that the compiler is under no obligation to execute any further into the line than it needs to actually give you the value back. So for example, if it sees that y is in fact equal to 5, right? If y was equal to 5, it is under no obligation to actually compute z equals 5. And furthermore, I believe, in fact, no, I know, the spec says it will not compute it. So if you wanted to do something like a function call here, like you were like, compute the thing 1, right? And I'm going to make some call, and then I'm going to say compute the thing 2. And I want to know if either of these functions returned you know, a particular value. Like I want to know if either of these returned not 0. It's under no obligation to actually do the second thing and will not do it. So it means that if you're expecting compute the thing 2 to get called, or you know, an easier one, since we haven't talked too much about function calls, let's say I did x equals x plus 3 in here and y equals y plus 5, because C allows you to put full expressions pretty much anywhere you want. So I can actually do work and update y and x right in the middle here if I wanted to. There's nothing wrong with that. This one will get done, right? But this one won't get done, because it'll do this one. It'll set x equal to x plus 3. That will be not 0, probably. And so it will never have to, it knows that the value of this OR will be 1, so it will never have to actually execute this. So y will come out of this not having been incremented by 5. So if you were expecting it to, you will be in for a surprise. That is what short-circuiting is, and it is good to be aware of. So thank you for bringing that up. Using code blocks, I can just use int main for my main function. What's going on with the Windows stuff in Visual Studio? It really has nothing to do with code blocks. The entry point is determined by the C runtime library and the operating system. So if you're talking about code blocks on Windows, you probably just made a project that was compiled in console mode. And if you compile a thing in console mode, even in Visual Studio, main is main, the one that you're talking about. For example, I can even show you that. If I go in here, I think I can probably set it. Again, this is always an adventure because I never know where all the settings are in Visual Studio, and I certainly takes me a while to find them usually. So if I go in here, and I want to do, let's see, can I do linker? There should be something in the linker that lets me kind of say what I want. Okay, so this subsystem thing here, where it says subsystem Windows, if I change that to subsystem console, right, and I compile this thing, when I compile it, you'll notice that it now won't link. And the reason it won't link is because it wants main, right? It no longer is looking for winmain. So then if I go in here and say main, and use the standard notation there for main, right? now my code starts there, right? And that's actually where the code, this is where the code will start, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but basically it has absolutely nothing to do with code blocks or Visual Studio. It's just whether you are compiling with that as the entry point. And either way, Windows is basically going to call into one or the other a layer up anyway. And this is something we'll do in the mainstream a little bit more. But if you look, getting way ahead of where we probably should be at this point. But hey, again, it's a Sunday. If you look at something called the call stack, which is basically the functions that have been called up to this point, where we are, how deep we are. If you back out of the call stack from where we are in main, you'll see that we're not actually at Windows. So this thing, I don't know if you can see this here. Oh, well, you can't because, of course, Visual Studio wants all of the things to be super small fonty. So let me go and let me set the fonts to something bigger here. So let's see. Call stack. Is call stack on the table, people? Intermediates window, output window, registers, watch, locals, autos, call stack. Hey. So I'm going to go ahead and set the call stack to Liberation Mono and get that to be bigger. Okay. So here we are in the call stack, and this tells us basically who is called into us, who the people are that called into us. So if you see kernel32.dll, kernel32.dll is actually where Windows actually entered us, right? So kernel32 is where the kernel mapped its code into our address space. It called into there, and then that called into us, and it called into us here. This is the C runtime library. This is code that Microsoft wrote that it linked with our executable, which does some startup crap that allows them to implement certain functions of the C standard runtime library. That called __ tmain CRT startup, which is also something that's supplied by Microsoft in their runtime library. That did a bunch of initialization code, right? You can see it happening here. What were they doing? They were doing some kind of a memory locked exchange. They slept for a while, I guess, if they couldn't exchange it. They did something to check whether they finished initializing. They went ahead and initialized C++ constructors that have to happen at startup time. I don't know. I mean, I'm just sort of vaguely guessing at what this is doing. Let's see here. They're linking, getting the command line. They're processing the command line for double quotes, it looks like. Skipping white space. And then they finally call winmain if it's winmain. Otherwise, they call main if it's main, depending on whether you started console or not. So that's actually what's going on there. And then finally, we actually get to us after all that stuff happens. If you were to link without the C runtime library, you'd be right here. You would be doing this. And so you wouldn't have all that stuff happen. You'd be right in you. I would like to know how many people bought the lesson. I'm curious at how big the community will be. I think the easiest way to see that is actually if you go to Twitch. So if you do twitch.tv handmade hero, is that how you do it? I think you can look and see how many people have subscribed, because more people subscribe than buy, I think. So how do you get subscribers? How do you know what? See, I'm too much of a Twitch noob. I don't know. I have no idea how you do how you get like the stats or whatever. But if you can go to like the thing that says, there you go, 1,300 followers. So I assume that means like roughly 1,300 people could be watching at maximum, because presumably, unless there's people who just don't know how to use Twitch and so they didn't follow it or whatever. But presumably, if you're going to try to follow along, then you did that. Okay. Let's see. Short circuiting. Will you show how to look for iCache misses in the mainstream? Probably not, unless we actually run into something where we're actually doing that. Now, maybe I'll do a section on like performance counters from Intel or something, but probably not. iCache misses are a super rare thing to be optimizing for, so I probably won't get to that. But I don't know. And again, I'm also the wrong person. Like, if you're optimizing for iCache misses, you're a hardcore optimization guy. I mean, that's pretty much it. If like 64K aliasing, ICAST misses, TLB, like if you're optimizing that stuff, you're a hardcore optimization guy. And you almost never need to do that for just to make a really good game. If you want to push technical boundaries, you absolutely do need to know that stuff, but we probably won't get that far. I'm going to give people essentially the start of like, here's how we optimize code to be good, and here's how we architect code to be good. But I'm not going to go all the way on anything because we could rat hole for months on optimization, and that's not the goal. Like the goal is for me to give you a complete game, show you how to make all of it good, and to let you know what you don't know so that if you're like, I really want to be someone who spends all my time working on X, you will know what X is and how to like go further. So so like in this stream, I mention iCache so that you know that it's there, but I don't necessarily show you everything you need to know about it. Do you use a lot of advanced algorithms shift to simple ones? Do you worry about algorithmic ON complexity? Yes, you always have to worry about algorithmic ON complexity. You should know the ON complexity of absolutely everything you do. If you don't, that is a problem. So I will be mentioning that often during the stream. Would you fight 1 horse-sized duck or 10 The Legend of Zelda swarming duck-sized horses? That is a tough question. I think probably horse-sized duck because I don't like horses. I don't trust them. I think ducks are more trustworthy. And so I feel like a duck and I could have a fair fight. Whereas I think 10 horses, no matter how big they were, wouldn't be a fair fight. They would try to do things to try and rig the fight against me. And I don't think that's fair. Like if me and the horse are going to have a fight, I mean, me and the duck are going to have a fight, it's going to be a gentleman's fight. And I feel like both of us will be able to enter it on terms that are fair and respect each other afterwards. No low blows, you know, nothing below the feather line. And whereas if it's going to be, for example, a horse, who knows what that thing's going to do? That's going to be one of those things where it's like, look over there, and then the horse tries to kick you, right? That's like what a horse would do. So I think I'd definitely fight the 1 horse-sized duck. I'm not sure if I can ask this, but what operating system is your PC? This one that we're on right now is Windows 7. Did I miss it, or did you not discuss functions, return values, passing by value, reference, etc.? We did discuss functions. We did discuss return values, but we have not yet discussed passing by value versus passing by reference, really. I mean, basically, those are things we'll probably get to more in the mainstream, as well as what kind of function calls you do, like standard call versus fast call. Have an opinion on data-oriented design, DOD main? I have not seen it, so I do not have an opinion. I do like code that is oriented around the data that it works with, so it sounds like something I would like, but who knows, maybe the name doesn't mean that. Weird that Simulatory didn't mention Stack Overflows at the obvious point unless I missed it. No, I did not mention Stack Overflows. Stack Overflows are just what happens when you run out of guard pages on the stack. So you've run out of space basically for the stack. And so you have to basically take into account the fact that you have limited stack size. But we will never do anything that comes anywhere close to using all the stack size, I don't think. So that probably won't be too much of an issue. But yeah, that's more of an advanced topic. If you're overflowing the stack, some stuff's either gone wrong or you're doing something particularly odd. Are you going to be using OpenGL DirectX? No. We're building the engine from scratch. We will not be using OpenGL DirectX. I may do eventually something that shows you how to do the renderer in OpenGL, just so you know how to do the equivalent things, but that would be like at the very end of the game, just to show you how to get more performance by using a GPU, basically. But yeah, that's it. Royal Thom says, the comma B thing does not work in Visual Studio 2013 either. So all the people who are saying comma B, why are you saying that? You're just trying to sow confusion. Don't say it if you haven't tried it. SCDF47, chance of me being able to follow along in Linux. Absolutely. The only problem is I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to handle this. Maybe what I'll do is try to help people. I'm not sure. But basically, I will do the developing on Windows, but I will show how to write the equivalent startup code on Linux and Mac. The question is when I do that. And so I'm trying to work out exactly how that's going to happen. What may have to happen is I'll just write the code myself, and I won't show how to write it, and it will be in the source tree. And then later, I will go and rewrite it, explaining how I write it on the live stream so that people can see. Something like that. I don't know. I'm still trying to work that out. But I would like people to be able to follow along on Linux and Mac if possible. So we'll see what we can do. Lordilia 1992, do the standard multiplication star use byte shift to optimize itself, or does it do it in some other way? The answer is that the compiler may take advantage of that, yes. If you do an integer multiply by 2, the compiler may shift if it's faster on that platform. That's just one of the things that Optimizer might do. I think usually that's called strength reduction in compiler parlance. It's been a while since I've talked to compiler. But basically, there's a set of optimizations that compilers can do, which turn operations that are expensive on the CPU into ones that are less expensive because they happen to work out. And so one of the things that can happen is a shift by 2, or a multiply by 2, or a shift can be kind of interchanged. So it will do that depending on the platform if it thinks it can get the speed win. Let's see. When you ask the chat something, keep in mind there's a delay, so make sure to wait 30. Yes, I do try to do that now. Will the allocator be lock-free, thread-safe? Miss Chanix wants to know. The allocator, so it depends exactly what you're talking about. Allocator means two different things. There's the thing that actually gets memory from the system, and that will probably not be lock-free or thread-safe. That will probably just be something that gets some memory from the system. The actual things that allocate out of that pool that it receives from the operating system, I suspect that there may be one place where those are lock-free and thread-safe, because there is one thing I do anticipate doing that will want that. Everything else will not require it. And you never write lock-free, thread-safe code if you don't need to, because it is more complicated. How much dependency injection do you use? Dependency injection. Dependency injection. I'm sorry, I do not know what you mean by dependency injection. If Enemy Mouse could tell me what they mean by that. The simple parameter passing. I'm sorry, Enemy Mouse, tell me what you mean by that and I will answer that. Let's see. Do you feel the same way about doing RAII for public APIs? Public APIs are a delicate topic, and I need to see the specific case always before I'm willing to make any kind of proclamation. I have a whole lecture that's like an hour long that's on the web about API design that you can look at if you want to, that answers some of those questions. But why will you not be using class instruct instead? Like in a bit of detail, maybe. Well, first of all, I mean, I should point out the fact, if it wasn't already known to someone asking that question, because I didn't cover classes, so if you're asking that question, you must already know. So I'm not sure why I'm typing this in, but there is no difference between a class and a struct in C++. They are exactly the same, except for one difference. And that is that a struct has this at the beginning of it implicitly, and a class has this at the beginning of it implicitly. That's pretty much it. So basically, why am I not using a class? Well, I could use a class. If you would prefer, there's my class. It's great, right? Do you love it? So yeah, there's no difference between a struct and a class. There's no difference between those two things. Literally no difference between those two things. Like, what do you want to do? Anything you want to do, you can do it. You want to inherit from something? Go nuts. Right? No problem. So there's no difference between a struct and a class. C++ doesn't distinguish between those two things as far as I know. They're 100% equivalent. They're 100% equivalent, except for which default you use. And it always cracks me up to watch C++ programmers type this always. I've never seen like a C++ programmer in modern times not start their class with public. I'm like, why didn't you just type that? Then you don't need that, and you can just type private down here, but who knows? I don't know why C++ programmers do what they do. They do what they do. You can't, you know, you gotta love them. They like to type a lot more than they need to. That's for sure. Why will you not be using class struct instead? Got that. Why no classes? Answered that. I have no idea what a mixin is. Can you elaborate? A mixin is when you say that something wants to have a lot of stuff. So for example, in a fictional language that is not exist, I want to create a projectile like I did before, but instead of having it specify its own layout and stuff, I just want to say that a projectile, it is an entity, it has flammability. It can explode. It does it does do damage, etc. And you basically list a bunch of stuff that you want to be true about this thing. And then the language mixes what all of those mean together into one thing that can do them all, right? And C++, with multiple inheritance, tried to do this, right? They tried to make it so that you can do those things. Like I inherit this thing from flammable, and other things, multiple inheritance. I inherit from multiple things that I might want to be, but it doesn't work properly because a lot of the things that you want to be able to do in that system don't actually work the way you want mixin to work. So what a lot of C++ programmers do is they do mixin by containment. So they'll put like a flammable thing in here, right? And then they'll have ways of like turning a projectile into a flammable by returning the interior thing out of it and blah, 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 blah. And it's all just a mess. So we will be trying to implement a system that does mixin more cleanly for the things that we want to do. And we'll just implement it by hand. We won't try to use any fancy language features. We'll just do it. And you'll see how it's done. It's no big deal. I never talked about the comma operator. That's true. I think it's actually technically called the sequence operator. And I am not going to talk about it because unless it actually comes up in the stream, which it might sometimes, I'll probably kind of just ignore it. For those of you who want to know what a comma operator is, it just basically puts two statements next to each other. So basically, if I do something like x equals 6, z equals 4, it basically allows me to do two separate statements that happen sequentially. Sort of like the semicolon operator, but it doesn't actually have the restriction that it has to be grouped on a separate thing. GoTo as well. I'm not going to cover GoTo because I almost never use them. So there is a GoTo in C, but I'm not going to cover it. There's a lot of things in C that I didn't cover. I mean, it was not an inclusive thing for sure. I understand that I can recreate the source code at home but just by following your stream, but what about art and music? Do I have to buy the game downloaded, or you provided some download links? Yes, if you want the art and music, you have to buy the game. That's kind of what the game is the source code, the art, and the music. So if you want that, you got to buy it. This might have been answered already. Do you use GoTo in C ever? No. I don't. I'm not strictly against it. I just haven't. I grew up not using it and just don't use it very often. Are you Ben Cousins? I do not know who Ben Cousins is. Let's see. Why do you like... Okay, I covered the class thing. Will you be showing the creation of any tools like a level editor? It's a good question. Probably will do a little bit of a level editor sorts of stuff. I want to show how to do procedurally generated worlds, so we won't be building like a really big level editor because we won't be editing levels a ton, but we probably will do a little bit of that, yeah. Have you ever made anything for the demo scene, or know anyone who has? I have not, but Fabian, who I've referred to a couple times, who works at RAD, was part of Fabrush. I don't actually know how you pronounce that, but he is a guy who works at RAD, who is a friend of mine, and he was part of the demo group. There we go. That's the one. Let's see. This is them. And they did a bunch of cool demos. Like K Krieger is pretty cool. It was like some like 120K executable that's like a whole Quake game, basically. It's pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, I do know, I guess that's one person who did something in the demo scene. I don't think I know anyone else. I don't know many people from Europe, actually, and the demo scene seems to be like way bigger there than it is here. So like I just haven't met that many people from Europe, so I don't know a lot of demo scene people. I think demos are really cool. I like the demo scene. I think that would have been something, I would have had fun growing up in that scene, but they didn't have that where I lived. Why not use a platform independent library? Because I want to show you how to make everything yourself. After you know how to make everything yourself, then by all means use a library if you like it. So what is the general plan for the game? Get something on screen as quickly as possible, put the infrastructure for the whole game, something else. We'll play it by ear, but basically we're going to get a simple thing up and running first, and then we're going to expand the parts as we go into more and more professional quality, because that's generally how you do it. Even when you're writing a game that's not a teaching game, you tend to want to structure it so that you push gradually outward, so you don't have like this sort of huge load of crazy architecture that has to happen first, where you don't know how all the parts interrelate. So if you sort of build over time, it usually works much better. Strength reduction, yes. Tea or water would probably be kinder to your voice than milk. It is almond milk, but that's possibly true. Will you show fractals and how to do them? No. Fractals will not really be related. Dependency injection means we used OOP to get us into a lot of trouble, and now we're using even more OOP to get it out of again. Then no, I probably won't do that. That sounds awful. DI is not a common thing in C, C++ beyond parameters for constructors. Other languages use reflected messages to pre-fill data. Okay, let's say, can a struct have a constructor? Yes. Okay, did your teachers seriously tell you? Okay, Lordilia 1992, did you really have a teacher who told you that a struct can't have a constructor? Because I do not know how you get a job teaching anyone anything if you can't take 10 seconds to type this. If you can't have a constructor, how did I just type that, right? That's all, that was literally like, 20 characters or something I had to type in to answer my student properly. How did you not do that before you said that? That's awful. Okay. I don't know, that's really weird. I suppose I shouldn't get mad. I mean, I say wrong things on this stream. I only know what I know, so I suppose maybe I shouldn't be so hard on people. Yeah, I guess they just never tried it. All right, I'm gonna not be mad about that. I think I should always try to be positive on the stream because you know what? Programming is complicated. And so I could see someone just not knowing. Like maybe you just never thought to try it. And if you never thought to try it, then I guess you'd probably just be like, I don't know, I've never seen anyone do it. So I just assumed that you couldn't. And I didn't want to read the spec because, I mean, I'll be honest, the spec is effing giant. So I could totally see you not wanting to read the spec. So never mind. I retract the rage. Rage retracted. If you would like to tell your teacher politely that you can have constructors and structs, you should do so. Someone asked about how you started a programming career. Let's hear it. So, okay, I think we're probably getting to the point where I should answer that question. Let's see. Will the game include old school passwords for saving? We could if you want to. Remind me when we're further along the game, and maybe we will. I'm going to show you how to save the game for reals to a drive, but we could do that. It's great to see someone so excited about programming and with a lot of experience, but do you think people interested in game design will be disappointed in the stream? I personally want to focus on game design first for my games, and only then implementing them properly in C++. Since I'm not interested in teaching C++ to other people, does my approach make sense for game development? Do you think it's faster to use Python for game prototypes? I would say that people who are primarily interested in game design probably would be disappointed in the stream because I am not a game designer. So if you're just interested in game design, you probably want to watch a stream by someone who's a professional game designer, I would think. As for whether it's a good idea to use Python or C++ or whatever, I have no idea. Whatever you are most comfortable using is what you should use. John Blow, for example, who's the best game designer I know, he writes his prototypes in C++. So, I don't know. I've never met a game designer who's as good as John. And so obviously you don't need to use Python, but John's also making his own language from scratch. So probably the reason he's not using Python is he thinks Python's also bad. And he probably thinks C++ is just a little less bad. And so what he probably really wants for making his games and his prototypes as well is just a good language. And that's what he's doing. So I certainly hope he succeeds. And maybe then the answer to that question will be much more obvious, which is just use John Blow language to make your prototypes because it's awesome. How much money do game makers make? I don't know. That's a good question. I have never really been a game maker. I actually make game technology, and licensing game technology was a great living. I have always been able to make a lot of money, and I'm very fortunate to be able to do so. I would say that in general, if you know the kinds of low-level programming that I am focusing on in these streams, where you understand the whole process, you do architecture well, you can get down to the nitty-gritty, you maybe aren't the best optimizer in the world, but you understand where the optimization happens and why, there are a ton of high-paying jobs available for you. I basically don't know a single high-paying company out there that isn't actually gated on talent, not money. Like, the primary problem most of the time for projects at companies is that they cannot hire enough good engine programmers. It is never the case that they have as many great engine programmers as they need. That never happens. There are usually just implicitly job openings if you're a good engine style programmer. So like if you came to me and you're like, I totally pwned the Handmade Hero stream, like I'm awesome at this now, I know everything about this, and you can prove to, well, you don't need to prove it to me because I'm not hiring, but you can prove that to someone that you understand all that stuff and you're totally good at it. I mean, that's just, you're instantly valuable somewhere. Because there's a dearth of people who understand this stuff. A lot of applicants that people get for these positions, they only know Java or something, right? Because that's what they learned in school or something, and that's not useful. And you can't put that person to work on a game engine for a long time. They're going to have to go through and like learn all this stuff, and you know. So basically, game engines are places where they need people. They always need people, and maybe in the future that won't be true. But for right now, it's always hard to find enough good, talented, low-level programmers. Will the source download include version control so we can go back versions? The source code control will not be version controlled. It will rather have every day's source in it. So when you download it, there'll be a zip for every day, and you can unzip the day that you want. If you have a source code control program that you like, you can just unpack those on top of each other and check them in and have your own source code control tree as it should be in the tool of your choice, Git or Mercurial or Bazaar or whatever you want to use. You will see some trolls on stream sometimes. Be advised. Yes, there's trolls. I know. What can you do? What do you do during the day these days? I am working on some projects that are not announced yet. Does working at Rad provide a better salary than a senior dev position at a game studio in the same area? No, because it's a high-paying area. So, like, for example, Valve pays very well. So, like, you know, if you were working at Valve or you're working at Rad, you would be getting paid very well. There are other places in the country where, and certainly actually also abroad, where the salaries aren't as high for those positions. And so it's really very dependent on how strong the game companies are in your area, because when those game companies are making a lot of money, they are going after that sort of hard to find engine programmers and stuff like that. They're paying a lot more money for them because they want the best people and they've got the money to do so. But you go to an area where there's not many game companies and they're not super wealthy, then they're not going to have that money to sort of chase that talent and whatever. A comment about the RIA discussion earlier. RIA does not actually mean that you have to use exceptions. Sure, but I didn't say that. I just was listing the things, exceptions, destructors, and so on. RAI is just not relevant. Like it is not a useful way to look at things. It doesn't matter how you implement it. It's just not a useful way to look at things. Will you use any libraries to make the game? No. And that brings us to the end of the question. So now I will go back to the question that we pushed on the stack, which was just totally not related to code at all. But it was Idiocracy's question. Where is the question? Where is it? Scrolling, scrolling. I'm sure if I knew how to search in this, we would be in good shape. But of course I don't, because I've never used HexChat before. And so not having used HexChat before means I don't really know what's going on. So let's see. Idiocracy, 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 Idiocracy. Where are you? You're gone. You're totally gone, Idiocracy. You have scrolled. There you are. It's a good thing I am using HexChat, though, because that would have long scrolled past the Twitch chat, I think. Yeah, the Twitch chat's not going to find that at all. Would you talk a little about your background at the start of your programming career? Given that you had an early start in programming at the age of 7, what were the circumstances in you not attending college? How have you gone about learning subjects like linear algebra? Did you crack open a textbook and learn it on your own, or did you just learn the bits and pieces relevant to game programming over the years? Finally, was getting an internship at Microsoft difficult, given your lack of degree? Well, so the complete story is that I grew up, like I said, my father was a programmer, so I learned to program because he taught me how. And that was the only way that I learned, because I didn't really have access to any programming resources besides him. I grew up in a town that didn't even have a bookstore, let alone a technical bookstore. So I pretty much had to just, and I didn't have like a BBS dial-in thing to anyone. I didn't have like friends who knew anything about programming at all. So for most of my childhood, I would ask my dad, and my dad would sometimes go get books for me from like Digital, like Equipment Corporation or something where he worked, and he would like give those to me and I could read those, or he would teach me how to do something. And then later on, like I think we would go, there was a when I kind of got a little older, there was like a Borders bookstore in Framingham, which was like 30 minutes away, and we would drive there and we'd sit in the section with computer books and look at them. Occasionally we'd buy one, but they're expensive for a kid. And you know, I started learning some things out of books. I think I learned, so I learned my first 3D math out of Foley and Van Dam. I think my dad had Xeroxed a page on rotation that I had learned stuff about that. And then I bought the book at the Borders eventually to learn stuff like matrix transforms. I think that's true. Gosh, it's been so long. I'm sorry, I can't remember a lot of these things, but basically, you know, in those days there was no internet, so it was actually pretty easy to learn a lot at home, because when you got home there wasn't anything to do, and if you liked computers you would just go try to do stuff. And so it's a lot easier to learn things on your own when you're not like on Twitter all day, right? Like I imagine kids today probably have a hard time learning things because there's just so much distraction and there's tons of games to play and all this other stuff. And so I played a lot of games when I was a kid too, but like you had one game that you bought and it was expensive and you played a lot of it, and then when you were done, right? There wasn't just like, oh, I can go and get all these games, and I bought a Humble Bundle and there's like basically 300 hours of gaming in there, right? That's not a thing. It was like $30 or whatever. And there was tons of game piracy too, but even that can't keep up. I mean, the amount of games pirated by people when I was a kid is like smaller than the amount that you could just legitimately buy nowadays on you know, a trivial part-time job that you have as a kid. You know, you make 20 bucks a week or something and you're going to have more games than you could even pirate from back when I was a kid. So yeah, I don't know. But point being, we learned a bunch of stuff. Myself and some friends of mine too, who used to kind of start to get into it. None of them were as into it as I was, but you know, we learned some stuff and wrote some stuff. Basically what happened from there is total luck. I was friends with somebody from early on, like from when I was little, and their father used to run a computer company. It went bankrupt or closed in some way, and he went to work as an executive for Microsoft. So when I was in high school, he was like, you should come out here for an internship. Now, I don't actually know why he wanted me to do that. I just assume he was just being nice. Like, I don't think there was any reason why Microsoft would care if I went out to do an internship, because I'm just some kid. But I think he just was like, oh, you know, this was a kid who's a friend of ours from back, you know, Microsoft's obviously in Seattle, so they moved to Seattle. But I was still in Massachusetts. So I'm pretty sure basically all that was just, you know, he was being nice, said, oh, you know, like maybe he would like to come out and see how we do things and he could do an internship. And I mean, I'm an executive here, so if I tell them that they should have this kid as an intern, they're going to. I don't actually know if that's true. Maybe he couldn't have done that. I'm not positive. But anyway, so I was in high school. I was like, okay. So I just went out there and went through their interview loop for interns. And I really, really, really lucked out on the interview loop is basically what it boils down to. Because being so young and not really exposed to very much things, there were only a limited set of things that I really knew how to do well. And one of the things that I really knew how to do well was stuff like sprite compositing. Because I'd done a bunch of programming on the Amiga and I knew a lot of stuff about how to work with like bit planes and all these sorts of other things like rectangle to rectangle copies with alpha or without or those sorts of things. I like knew all that stuff cold because I did it all the time. That was like what I did because I tried to make games, and one of the things that you do when you make games is you move images around a screen. So I super lucked out in the interview loop because the very first person on the interview loop was a guy named Michael Edwards, I believe, and I don't know what happened to this fellow. But it's a guy named Michael Edwards, and he was actually an old school Amiga guy too. And so the question he happened to ask me for whatever reason was like, do a rectangle to rectangle blit, like copy from one place to the other. And I can just write that, like that, even at that time I could just write that. And so I think he thought, he enjoyed talking to me because we were both Amiga people, and he was like, oh, this kid knows how to program because he could do this thing, this interview question, you know, that I asked him. And then I had to go through other interviews of the day where I did not do nearly as well. Like Things I didn't know how to do very well at that time were like bit operation for testing. Like I almost never tested bit fields and stuff. So like one of the questions that they asked me was something like, if you get back a byte and you want to know if there's a particular 2-bit value at any of the 4 aligned locations in the byte, like what's the fastest way to do that? And like, I'm sure I answered that question super poorly. And another guy asked me how to draw a circle really effectively. And he was looking for me to basically do a Bresenham circle sort of style thing. And I didn't really know how to do that at all. So, I mean, I gave him code that drew a circle, but it was like super slow by comparison. So I think mostly, like, I don't know what would have happened exactly if I hadn't had that luck of getting someone who happened to just be right in line with me on the first interview. Because again, it's possible, like if some Microsoft executive says that we've got this idiot kid from my hometown who I want to have come out here and do an internship, I mean, it's a political company. Maybe they would just have to do that. You know, like maybe they just be like, great. But luckily for me, I actually had one interviewee who actually really did legitimately, I think I was okay. Probably not anything special, but at least okay. And so they put me with him and said, you know, you can do the internship over the summer and you can go with this team. And I was like, awesome, because you know, I knew when I went through the interview, like I'm like, yeah, I think I probably was pretty stupid in those other ones, but I felt like I did a really good job here and I answered the question totally correctly and that sort of stuff. And I really liked the guy, so I was like, I could probably actually not be a total waste of time there. So anyway, I went out for the internship over the summer, and the internship itself was a bit of a disaster, I will say. And all I can say about that, just being completely honest, is I showed up and the guy who I had interviewed with had in classic Microsoft fashion back then. It is not, Microsoft now is a very milquetoast politically correct company. When you go there, you will probably sit through hours of diversity training every year or something, where you watch a video that has like one black person, one Asian person, you know, one Hispanic person, one white person, and like the right mix of females or whatever, all doing things in an office place that they shouldn't do, and then a little like red X comes up and goes, that was inappropriate behavior. What you should have done is blah, 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 right? Like that is the company that they are right now. And it's not their fault. When you get big as a company, you got to do this stuff. There are lawsuits. There's, you know, just an incredible bulk that happens with a company where you're trying to manage 100,000 employees. That's just what happens. And it happens to everyone. It's happening to Google now. It happened to Microsoft back then. It happens to everybody. But at that time, this is back in 93 or 94 or something like that. I don't know, somewhere in there. Microsoft was still kind of a lean, mean company. They were 26 buildings total, I think, at the time. And their programmers were still super gung-ho, really sharp dudes. If you were working at Microsoft, you were pretty good, usually. And I met a lot of really good people when I was there. And it was the era of people throwing a monitor through a wall if stuff went down. And so basically what had happened was there was some huge blow up with the guy I had interviewed with that had nothing to do with me. It was about the projects and the way he was running them. And he literally just a couple of days before me and the other interns who were going to be under him showed up, literally just stormed out of the building and didn't come back. Like nobody knew where he went. He just left. He was so pissed about what had gone down, I guess, he just left. So I show up, and there's this other guy, his name I think was Bruce Johnson, and he was a person who used to work at this sort of like, he used to work at a company that did like defense contracting graphic stuff. I think he originally worked on a thing, I think he might have worked on SimNet. I don't know if he did or not. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Point being, he's there, and I'm like, who are you? And he's like, well, the guy who was supposed to be your guys' manager, and I'm there with like this other guy. I think it was Rudy Celebresi. I don't remember who the other guy was who showed up on the same day. It might have been Rajiv Goyal. I don't remember. There was a couple guys there who were also interning at the same time as me. They were better programmers. They were like from college, you know. So I'm the stupidest one in the bunch for sure. And I don't know what the hell's going on because I'm a high school student. So I don't know how to behave in a corporate setting or anything. I'm just an idiot. I'm a complete waste of time, but I'm there. And so the other dude I'm with, they sit us down and they're like, look, the dude you were supposed to be with, he's gone. And nobody knows when he's coming back. So I'm going to sort of be your manager for now. And we're only there for 2 months. And this guy is out. So it's like, all right, well, fine. And so he gives them something to do. And he tells me, he's like, I want you to write a library for basically for loading ANI files, which were the thing was some hacked up POS format that I don't know who came up with it. But basically on Windows, there was a time when you could have animated cursors. And I don't know if those are still around anymore. But if you remember in like the original NT351, any of you out there who are old enough to remember this, and even going forwards, I think probably to NT4 still, I don't know when it stopped happening, but if you went into the mouse cursor settings, you could pick some absolutely ridiculous stuff. There was like a walking dinosaur, like a dinosaur that walks while you're moving the mouse cursor. It's ridiculous. There are these little like things. And so what they had is they had written a little file format called ANI, which basically had a bunch of little bitmap frames in it. And I think they were only 16 color bitmap frames because this was cursors were still done with a hardware overlay at that point on most of the graphics cards of the day, I want to say. And so they were like 16 color only, and you loaded them in to make little cursor animations like the walking dinosaur or like a pointer that wiggles or other stupid things like this that no one cared about. And what he was like is, we want to do this thing. We don't have a format to load animations from. I don't think he really knew what he was doing. So maybe he was just trying to make up something for me to do, and that's fine too. But makes no sense. But he was like, they were trying to do something with animations. They wanted to do something with 3D and 2D overlays. So he's like, go write an ANI loader so we can load ANI files and like show them on tops of stuff. But like, they're these little tiny, I mean, they were like 16 by 16 or 32 by 32, I think, maximum maybe, by 16 color. I mean, I don't know what he thought was going to happen, but he wasn't, I think, maybe thinking it through. Anyway, so he's like, go write a library for load those. So I did. I went and wrote a library to load those. I like found the spec. I don't know how. It was on some server somewhere or something like this. He probably pointed me to it. I wrote a library that loaded them, and I wrote a little app that used the library that just kind of showed it just showed the little things or whatever. And then I had nothing to do. And so they were like, the other guy was busy like working on some 3D stuff. One of the other interns who was pretty good. And then, there were some other guys who were working on sort of some OpenGL rendering who weren't interns, and they were working on this project, and so they needed some 3D art. So actually what I did for most of the rest of the internship was I just made 3D art for them. They bought a copy of 3D Studio. This was the first time I really had an experience with like exactly how cheap money is for, and I won't use the term these people because I am these people now who work in this industry, but like at the time, the concept that you would just send email and a $3,000 piece of software would show up at your desk the next day was absurd, right? Probably $3,000 would have been all the money that I'd ever made in my lifetime and then some. Because I think the Microsoft internship paid something like $2,400 or I don't know how much it made, but it was more than I had ever made in any job at all by far, right? And so prior to that, $3,000, there's no way I was ever going to have my hands on $3,000. If something got purchased for $3,000, my parents would just have to be being extremely nice to me and buying me something expensive because, I mean, $3,000 was a lot for them too. Like it wasn't, $3,000 was a lot of money. But that's exactly what happened. I was like, all right, well, I kind of knew how to use 3D Studio a little bit because there was this pirate copy from this BBS guy that I knew. So I had seen it before and I had used it before, but I hadn't really spent any serious time with it, so I didn't really know what to do. But I'm like, well, if we need to make 3D art, I know you can make it in that if you can load it out of that. And there were no artists at this place. So I'm like, if we could get a copy of that, and I don't know what to do. I certainly can't pirate something at Microsoft. I'm not going to try and call up people and be like, can we pirate a copy of this thing? Because it's got to be legitimate, right? So I don't know what to do. But they're like, oh, it's no problem. So someone sends a thing in, and it's not one box of 3D Studio that shows up. It was like at least 2, it could have been like 4. I don't remember how many showed up, but it was like multiple boxes of $3,000 software showed up. And I'm like, what the fuck? So like I probably shouldn't use that language on the screen in case there are children watching. I apologize. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. I'm like, you can just send mail and like $12,000 worth of software shows up on your desk. That's insane. So I made art with that for the rest of the time. I didn't really do much programming. They were doing some stuff in C++, and I didn't know C++. I only knew C at the time. And so I would have just gone back home and that would have been it. But we get to the meat of the story now, kind of the bizarre part of the story, which is I also was one of the only people who was under 18, because almost everyone else was in college. I was not legally allowed to really do anything like drive a car because a car rental company doesn't rent to you if you're under 18. I did find out there was a loophole to this somewhat later, which was that it turns out that if you tell the people you're from Microsoft, they just rent you the car. This was very strange. At one point, a friend of mine came out to visit me while we were there, and he was a friend of mine, and he's like an outdoorsy guy, which I'm not really, but he was like, we should go up to like Crystal Peak or something. We should go out to the mountains. And I'm like, we can try. And so like I went to a car rental place. I don't remember how I got there. I don't know if I took the bus or I think maybe I had somebody drive me because again, I was friends with that Microsoft executive guy and their family was out there. So I probably had someone maybe drop me off and went into the car rental place. And I'm like, I want to rent a car. And I'm like, I have a valid driver's license, but I'm like 16 and a half or 17 or something, right? And so they're like, we can't rent you a car. And I'm like, well, I work at Microsoft. I'm interning there for the summer. And they're like, oh, okay. And they like gave me the car. And I'm like, all right, that's pretty amazing. I don't know if they just think Microsoft's good for it at that point or what, but they were just like fine with it. So we were able to go with it. Anyway, so it turns out you actually can rent a car. But anyway, point being, I'm out there and I'm living in a place that's literally a block away from campus, from the Microsoft campus. I just walk to work every day and back. And honestly, I thought it was the greatest thing ever. If I had been smarter at the time, a little bit smarter, I would have just effing stayed. Like, there's no way I would have gone back to high school. High school was awful. And I didn't have any interest in going to school anymore. I hated school. I just wanted to program computers for the most part. And that's what I got to do every day. And everyone at Microsoft was smarter than me. And everyone there knew more programming than me. So it's like, and you can send mail and get $3,000 worth of software delivered to your desk. Like, why would you ever want to leave? There's free drinks just around. Like, any soda that you want is there. The cafeteria was subsidized. I paid like $4 a day to eat, right? And for me, this is amazing. Like, this was the best thing that had ever happened. And if I had had any clue at all, I would have just like tried to be a better programmer while I was there and just said, can I just stay here? Like, don't send me back there. Don't send me back to high school. Because unlike a lot of people, I guess, I really liked all my friends in high school. I actually liked the people that I went to high school with. A lot of friends of mine who are programmers said they had like bad experiences in high school, or like they were like an outcast or something. I don't even know. But I actually really liked the people at high school. And I think that's why I went back. But high school, like sitting in classes, was awful. It was the worst thing ever. And I would absolutely never wish that on anyone. It was the worst thing. It's terrible. So anyway, I didn't do that, but that's what I should have done at the time. But point being, getting back to the story, free food was a big deal, or subsidized food, I should say. And there was free food sometimes too. They'd have these intern events that like HR would schedule, and they would have like free food for us, and they would set up like volleyball and stuff. I mean, for somebody who's like spent their whole life programming by themselves, and really the only thing that you get for that is people think that you're the smart computer kid in class or whatever, is really the only thing that happens because you know how to program. Going into an environment where suddenly everyone really likes the fact that you program and does all of these things for you is kind of amazing. And so I think nowadays probably people take that for granted because everyone just knows if you work at a computer company, it's super fancy and people ride scooters down the hall and you get all this free food. It's like, that was not a thing back then. And so I was amazed and it was totally awesome. But when dinner time rolled around, there was no dinner. I mean, everyone was gone. Everyone left for the day, right? So by 6, 7 o'clock, there's no one left, and I'm just sitting there at my desk, and I don't have any food, and I wasn't much of a cook, and don't have a car, so it's like this thing now. It's like this problem. It's like, how am I going to eat tonight? You know? And I did the obvious thing. I'd like just buy more food at lunch, or I'd like buy food at lunch and take it back with me. Or like I think the dude who I was rooming with in the intern housing, he like had a car, so I'd just pay him, I think, and he would go to the supermarket and he would bring back food for me too. But eventually, this is where the luck part strikes again. So one luck was that someone asked me to come out to intern at Microsoft at all. That was complete luck and was not deserved. Like, I didn't do anything to have that happen other than the fact that I had been programming computers a lot. So it's complete luck that I got there. And then the second thing of complete luck was the fact that I didn't know how to cook. I didn't really know how to make dinner. I love to cook now, but I didn't know anything there. So I was often at my desk late at night. I had nothing to do, didn't have any dinner. And I started to hear noises kind of around in the building. I'd hear people, and I'd be walking and I'd see like this weird dude with a totally messed up African looking hat on his head. And I'm probably using the wrong term. I associate with an African hat because I feel like there are certain tribal cultures that use this kind of a hat. It's basically like a cylinder with a top, and you put it on your head, right? And it's colorful. They're kind of cool looking. But I don't know the culture of the various different regions of Africa. It's a huge country and there's tons of different peoples there. But for some reason, I associate that with like, you know, some kind of a tribal decoration, you know, a tribal symbol hat or something. So there's this guy walking around in that with that hat on his head, and I'm like, where is he going? So I just kind of followed him, I think, and he went into this conference room, and there's all this food there. There's like 4 chafing dishes of food, and it's 8 o'clock or something at night. I don't even know, it's late. And there's all this food there, and there's 2 other guys, I think, were there, at least one other guy. And I'm like, hey, you know, what's going on? What's all the food for? It turns out the guy in the hat is Chris Hecker. He works there at the time. He's working on WinG, which is like this thing to support games. It's like fast blitzing on Windows machines. He's trying to basically get games on Windows. He's running a group to ship this WinG thing under Mike Edwards, the guy who flamed out and left the building and, you know, came back. He ended up coming back 2 weeks later, and it was this huge thing. But he, you know, at that point, they kind of had disciplined him for this action. It was a little crazy. Right? Not important. That's the details of his life, and I don't know the specifics. But point being, he was under Mike Edwards, and I guess the flame out, the whole fight that Mike Edwards had with management was over Chris's project because they weren't supposed to be doing it or something. And he was kind of protecting Chris's project because he thought it was a good idea, and it was a good idea, by the way. But anyway, Chris is running this project, and actually working for Chris at the time, I believe, was Alex St. John, the guy who ended up running Wild Tangent and who did the DirectX evangelism, if any of you know who that was. He was Chris's evangelist on WinG. He was responsible for going around pitching Chris's project to external game companies. He used to evangelize printers, printer drivers to people, like write your printer drivers for Windows. And he actually was working for Chris at the time. And in that room, I think it was Chris. I want to say it was John Blossom, who was working with Chris on WinG, the project. John Blossom later went on to do some indie games himself. He also worked on Star Wars Droid Works and Sim Park and stuff like that. I don't know. He worked on a bunch of things. Anyway, I was like, hey, can I can I have some of this food? Do you mind if I eat some of this food? And I think they were like, sure. I'm probably getting the details slightly wrong because I'm going to tell you one other thing in a second here, and I'm not sure which one of them actually happened first. But they were like, sure, because they had more food than they needed. And basically what it was is because WinG was technically in beta shipping or something like this, Microsoft was providing food for them and paying for it. So there was just free food every night now. So basically every night I hung out with Chris and them and would chat and whatever, and we got to be friends. So I was also someone who, right before then, I had learned to play Doom back home because we had Doom at home before I came out for the internship. And of course, Chris and John often set up Doom on the local network at Microsoft because you could play local networked games of Doom, multiplayer. Would set up a local network thing of Doom and just play it a bunch at night when no one else was there, right? I don't know how much development of WinG was actually happening at night between the food and the Doom But I didn't care because that was not my project and I didn't know what was going on. So I just basically was like eating free food, so I had something for dinner now, and playing Doom with these guys, and I loved Doom, and I'd never played it multiplayer before, so that was awesome. And everything was great. So anyway, that is really how I ended up getting into game programming, because Chris liked me well enough, and he thought it would be cool if we worked together after that. So he introduced me to a bunch of his friends who were game industry people, and after I finished high school, I came out to Seattle to work with Chris. Now, the game that we worked on never shipped. It never really even got going, because he was starting a company and we kind of worked on it together, but I eventually stopped and went and got a real programming job, basically. But we worked on it for a little while. So basically, I went with Chris and John Blossom, guy from WinG, and another guy called John Ross, who's actually the programmer, the PC programmer of SimCity 2000. SimCity 2000, the Mac side was written by Will Wright, obviously, and the PC side was written by this other guy, John Ross. The four of us worked on a game together for a little while. It didn't pan out, but by that time, Chris had introduced me to lots of game people so I could get a job in the game industry, which I did, and I was still an absolutely terrible programmer at the time. I worked for Gas Powered Games for a little while and did absolutely nothing useful for them because I was a lousy programmer. I then went to Rad Game Tools after that, and that is basically where I learned to program for real. Jeff Roberts, the guy who basically runs Rad Game Tools and has programmed every version of Smacker and every version of Bink up to Bink 2, where me and Fabian did work on it. But basically, he had done all the work before then. It was just Jeff Roberts. His wife did the accounting, I think, did the books. Mitch Sewell, who was the sales guy, and what's his name? I don't remember what the receptionist name. Oh, Colin, the receptionist, and a guy named John Miles. That was the entirety of Rad at the time when I went to work there. So I was like, it was basically the only programmers were Jeff, John, and me. Now, John Miles is actually a very, very famous game industry person. You may not have heard of him recently because he doesn't really do any game stuff anymore. But he was the guy who wrote, I think, a lot of the Ultima 5 engine, Ultima 5 going way back. He did like a lot of, I think he did the texture mapper for Wing Commander 4, the first one that actually had real 3D. You know, he wrote the Miles sound system, which is what almost every game used for audio at that time. He was the tech director at Digital Anvil, the people who did like Starlancer and Freelancer, and that Chris Roberts kind of totally, I guess, I don't want to impugn anyone's reputation here, but like it kind of cratered, and I don't think it had much to do with John Miles. But anyway, that was what he did before. I guess he went off to Hollywood to make the movie of Wing Commander, the movie or whatever. Maybe, no, I guess it was after that. I don't even remember that. You have to go look at the history of this. I don't even remember. But John Miles, point being, was a very famous programmer for a long time. And then his first love was always hardware. So eventually he just kind of retired from software at all, and he does hardware now, like hardware design. So anyway, I went to Rad, and that's where I basically spent the rest of my career. Up until the point where I decided to leave and try my hand at game design. One of the reasons that I say over and over again I'm not doing any game design on this project, I'm just going to do very straightforward old school game design, because I am terrible at game design. I tried designing a game, it's called Sushi Bar Samurai, and the implementation of the game went very well because, hey, I know how to program. And I also know a lot of stuff about art, so I was able to make a bunch of art for the game. The art looked real good, but the design of the game was terrible. Because I was trying to design a new thing. Instead of like making an old thing that I understood, I tried to design a new thing, and I was not good enough for that. I think I know enough design to design, you know, a traditional game and not mess it up too badly, and that is exactly what I want to do on this stream. But I clearly proved to myself that designing new stuff is something better left to the experts. So if you're going to design a game that's like totally different from existing games, I am not your guy. That is like John Blow territory. Or Daniel Ben-Mergui. I know a lot of people who've got those skills, and I don't have them. So I still have that game, and it's kind of cool. Like, there's some cool stuff in it, and there's some cool tech in it, but the gameplay is awful, and it just never really amounted to anything. So I tabled that, and since then I've just basically worked on game tech, which I think is mostly what I'm good at, is just technology for games. And so I worked on a project called Larrabee, which was Intel's attempt basically at making a card that could do CPU and GPU stuff, so that you just have one processor that did everything, essentially, so you didn't need a separate graphics card. And it was a pretty cool project, but there was a number of political reasons at Intel that it looked like it just was not going to work. And so I left that project shortly before it kind of collapsed. I was kind of a rat off of a sinking ship at some level. But it was kind of fun because we got to work on like low-level implementation of graphics, like of DirectX basically. And that was working with like Ottman Binstock and Mike Abrash and Mike Sarton and later Fabian, but he came on actually after I was off the project to do some cleanup work with Ottman because they stopped sort of working on the mainline driver at that point. That turned into Intel High Performance Computing. So instead of making graphics card out of the thing we were making, they ended up just making a high performance computing part that's basically used for crunching huge numbers. And you can still buy it, you can actually buy it, but you don't use it as a graphics card, basically. After that, I worked on Bink 2 with Jeff, and I basically did all the like sort of research code implementations style things, if that makes any sense. And so I essentially did stuff that like Jeff would go, I need these blitters, or I need this thing, or I need a filter that will do blah, and I would go do those for him. And I also made a debugging system called Mustache for that, which is pretty cool. If we're bored on the stream sometime, I'll demo Mustache. It's a pretty cool thing. I also did, after that, I worked on the Witness for a little while with John, doing their collision detection system and upgrading the editor, as well as a couple other things, which I documented in Witness Wednesdays. And that is the end. And I'm now working on some stuff that I haven't announced yet, which is what I do during the day. And I'm doing Handmade Hero at night. And that is pretty much everything. I probably forgot some stuff, but that is pretty much everything. So hopefully that answered the question. I'll take a quick look at the stream just to see if there's anything obvious that I left out. Let's see here. How do I get down to the end? Can I use page down? There it goes. All right. Let's see. Someone said you should probably put your webcam at 100% of the screen space during the QA sessions, huh? Yes, that would be smart. That requires a certain level of sort of prowess here that I don't know. So I suspect what I probably have to do is some kind of like setting up multiple profiles. So I'll take a look at that for next time, because you're right. If we're going to do some kind of weird chat days, which we might want to do at some point, I'm going to write that down to make some way I can quick switch between the two. Quick switch to full webcam. All right. So I don't know who stayed for that ridiculous rambling nonsense. It looks like almost everyone. Well, that was story time with Casey. I have to go now, so thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in to the very last test stream. I hope you had a good time. I know I did. And I hope to see everyone tomorrow for the inaugural stream of Handmade Hero. And yes, I hope to see you all there. If there's anything that you would like to ask, feel free to go to the Handmade Hero website, where there is this little email question button. If you want to know when we are broadcasting, the tweets button has a stream that basically all it does is send out notifications when the stream is coming every day. So you can just quick look at that. You don't even have to subscribe to it if you don't want to. You can just literally just pop over here and just look at what the top is, and it'll tell you. And at some point we'll try to have a countdown timer on here. But anyway, that's it for today, and I hope to see everyone here tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.